Morning everybody, my name is Brendan Stamp from Guardian Fire. I've been in the fire and life safety, I've been in the fire and life safety industry for the past 20 years, helping businesses with their life safety obligations. In regards to this, I work with a number of clients across the food and beverage sector, as well as across many other sectors. And I suppose today, the idea is that I share some of my experiences with yourselves in regards to what we've came across in the fire and life safety area. My expertise doesn't lie in PowerPoint, so don't hold that against me, please. Do you may ask me what sectors you're from yourselves, or is it retail, food production main, and yourself? Yeah, no, it's just, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at maybe one or two case studies rather than basically go through it, and maybe if you have any questions, feel free to interact and just give me a holler there on it. So, not to bore you, but the standard governing fire and life safety systems is IS 3218 2013. This covers all premises, whether it be food, cafe, industrial, commercial, etc. They're in place primarily to protect life and secondarily to protect obviously businesses, etc. The primary function for any life safety system is to get our staff, our visitors and ourselves out of the building. And I suppose just in regards to that, the main purpose of any of this is system planning. And just in regards to system planning, it's no longer enough to integrate systems into a business without due consideration of future planning. In a lot of cases, what happens is a system is put in and there's no thought given to what happens going forward or any plan in the future. In that regards, basically, any system should be a partnership between all parties in regards. And all parties in this instance would be the client, the consultant, the local fire authority, the insurer and the installer supplier. Without getting all those people involved and having them all have some kind of interaction with each other, basically the system you'll get at the end of that, it won't be the system that you need or that's compliant. So it's extremely important that all parties at the start of all these design or system planning are talking to each other. Because in a lot of cases what you could have is the fire officer coming in afterwards with specific requirements for the sites, and you've already done your system planning and it results in a complete change of the type of system you have. Keep going there now. So basically what we have here is, I'm going to look at two case studies here. The first being retail service station. What this was is in 2015 we had an electrical fire in a service station and the unit had to be refitted at the start of 2016. And what happened was originally the system was probably done back in the early 2000s and had a very basic system. And systems that came along a lot since then. And what happened in that instance was the building had an electrical fire and the fire burned for quite a period of time and did some damage before actually it was detected. And the reason behind that is the type of detection medium they used in the premises. Because there was a fast food outlet and a coffee dock and there was a high possibility of false alarms, originally the building utilised heat detectors, and that would have been standard for that course at the time. But what it meant was when there was a fire, specifically an electrical fire, we got a lot of smoke and the heat detectors didn't detect the fire in a rapid response time. So basically in regards to that, when we looked at it and we looked at it for a retrofit, we identified basically what we had for cause of false alarms, which was we had cooking fumes, we had a coffee dock and the likes of that. And by identifying that and speaking with the client, we said, right, what we have here is, let's look at a different type of system. Let's look at a system whereby we use what we call multi-sensors. And have you ever heard of multi-sensors, or have you ever came across them? Basically what a multi-sensor is you've got a smoke detector and a heat detector in one device. And what we can do through technology and through software and all now is we can say, right, between 9 AM and 6 PM, we want that to be a heat detector. So during 9 and 6, when the building is occupied and they're cooking and you've got staff and you've got customers coming in using the coffee dock and we've got steam, etc. Basically, we have heat detectors in place. And if a fire obviously occurs, then basically hopefully the staff will alert us via break glass units or the heat detectors will activate. But then once 6 o'clock hits, through the software on the system, it automatically kicks into what we call smoke detectors. And what happens there is when the building is unoccupied, we are a higher level of protection in the building. So from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 9 a.m. in the morning, they're smoke detectors. So when there's no one in the building and we have a high possibility of maybe a fire occurring where we'll have smoke, basically they turn into smoke detectors. So it gives us reduced false alarms and enhanced level of protection during unoccupied times. And in that instance, that system's been running probably for about 6 months at the moment, and we haven't had a single false alarm from it. Whereas before, they were changing detectors around and all that because it hadn't been planned out right, and it hadn't been thought about. But that's mainly in regards to retail. That can go for cafes, restaurants, etc. But it's an ideal way to get over that kind of false alarms occurring during surgery periods in restaurants, etc. Just the second case study we're going to look at then is to do with production facility, and specifically food production facility. But this can work across food production, microbreweries, in that area. So what we were looking at here was an upgrade of a fire alarm system. The original system, again, because it had been put in a number of years before, used heat detectors. And because of that, basically the level of protection was very minimal, because with a heat detector you have two different types. You have what's called a rate of rise, which requires the temperature to rise a certain amount over a certain period of time, or you've got fixed temperature. And what fixed temperature is, it means it has to reach 59 to 65 degrees before it will actually activate. And obviously in an environment there, you can see the challenges where we have chilled environment, and where you have that kind of environment, what happens is you get thick black smoke. Because generally what you'll have is you'll have a machine basically burning out, or you'll have an electrical fault. And what will happen is you get thick black smoke coming up because the chilled air will keep the heat temperature down. And we've had this in one instance, specifically in this instance, what happened was they had thick black smoke. The detection medium that was installed at the time was what we call linear heat cable. It was a heat detection medium, and it never activated. And the solution to that then basically was to look at maybe a detection medium that would detect smoke rather than heat, specifically in chilled environments. And also, I suppose, just going forward, we have steam present and we have washdown areas. In most food production now, we have washdown areas, we have steam present, and we have some kind of chiller environment. In regards to that, the solution put forward there is what we call an air sampling system. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with any of these terminology, but air sampling system is whereby we put in a network of pipe, and what it does is it pulls the air from the environment and it samples it at a single point, and at that point then it'll alarm back to the system whether there's a fire or not. But we have huge flexibility in that it's more cost effective to install, it's more cost effective to maintain, and also gives you a higher level of protection, gives you an enhanced level of protection. We can set then the different levels of it to activate at kind of high, medium or low levels of smoke. And we have different facilities to put on it then that will allow us to filter out moisture, will allow us to filter out fumes from forklifts, etc. And it'll filter out cooking fumes, so it specifically looks for smoke in the environment, for those particles of smoke. And that generally allows us to install. It's ideally suited to cold rooms, large warehousing facilities, cooking facilities, etc. The cost of materials whereby might be slightly higher, it's offset by the actual cost. They're reducing cost for installation. But I suppose in that regards, generally what we find is that people will generally tend to use a heat detection medium, which results in a lower response time. It means that you won't have false alarms. It's brilliant. You just won't have false alarms. But what it does mean is that your response to a fire is extremely limited. And that's why it's important, I suppose, to detect a fire at the earliest possible time. Number one, to get the staff out and your visitors out. But number two, also to protect your investment in materials, and your stock. Just in regards to maintenance then of the systems, I suppose in a lot of cases once the system is installed, the client is happy with the system, it's not giving false alarms, there's no issues with it. But what they don't realise is that the system is handed over to you and it becomes your system, and you become responsible for that system. As such, there's a certain responsibility on you, I suppose, to be responsible for it, and there's a specific section in the standard that requires you to nominate what's called a responsible person. And that responsible person then should ensure that all fire safety measures are met and followed. I always ask a couple of questions when customers are going to me, and the first one is, am I familiar with my fire alarm system? Do I know how it operates? If a fire alarm goes off, do I go to the panel in silence and walk away? Or do I actually investigate it and see what's going on? I had a client this week whereby we asked them what they do when the fire alarm goes off. They said they silence the fire alarm, wait half an hour and reset it. And after half an hour, if they reset and it doesn't go back off, they're happy. They won't worry about it. But in that 30 minutes, something huge could be happening elsewhere in the building. Second then is, what checks am I required to carry out? Under the regulations, you yourselves as an owner-occupier or a responsible person are required to do weekly checks on the system, do daily checks on the system, and do monthly checks on the system. The daily checks is that you should, as you walk past your fire alarm system, you should check that there's a green light on it and that there's no faults or no fires. If there is, then basically you address them when you contact your maintenance provider. Your weekly checks should be that you should activate a different grade class unit on your system every week. Make sure the system operates, make sure it reports to your monitoring centre, and log that. And the third one then is just on a monthly basis, you do all these, so you incorporate them all together. And that's separate to your maintenance provider coming in. So your maintenance provider provides your maintenance checks for you, whether it be biannually or quarterly. But apart from that, there's another responsibility on you to ensure that your system is functioning and is operational. Thirdly then, what records am I required to keep? On site on all buildings, generally the fire officers have a requirement for a fire register on site. And that is a booklet that includes all your areas of fire safety, whether it be first aid training, whether it be fire alarm, emergency lighting, fire extinguishers, etc. So there's a book that should be kept on site. And generally your fire alarm provider or your fire extinguisher provider can actually supply that to you. It's very important that that's filled out and it's kept up to date regularly, because when you do have a fire officer visit, that's the book you look for, and you look to ensure that everything's been followed. How often should my system be maintained? That's to do with your maintenance provider. Depending on the size of your system, you should have your system maintained twice or 4 times a year. Generally it works out about 4 times a year, depending on the size of your system. A system over 20 devices, which is 20 smoke detectors, 20 break glass units, must be done 4 times a year. Under that, depending on risk assessment, etc., you can get it done twice a year. But it's important to look at that, because if you do have a small facility, in a lot of cases you could be getting more visits than you require, and then in some cases where you have a larger facility, you could be getting less visits than you're required to do. And then finally, and most importantly, is my provider competent. It's now up to you as the responsible person to ensure that the person providing your service is actually competent and is trained to carry out that work. So it's from your point of view that has to be made. Just briefly, it's just something I provide to our clients ourselves. It's just pictorial of false alarms, and generally what we do is we put it up throughout the building, and it's just for staff and all to be aware, because there's a number of issues, and the most common cause of false alarms we get specifically in the manufacturing and production area is aerosol sprays, it's hot work, and it's accidental or malicious damage. We generally don't get any issues with cooking fumes and steams, etc. Because if the system is designed correctly, you shouldn't be getting false alarms. The standard kind of allows for 2 to 4 false alarms a year, depending on the size of your system. But generally, if the system is designed correctly, you shouldn't be getting false alarms. And if you are getting a large amount of false alarms, there's something there. But most importantly there, what we found recently is the levels of false alarms have slightly increased in some of the buildings, purely because production has increased and extra lines have gone in, etc. And if we're not made aware, if your provider isn't made aware, and I can't stress this enough, if they're not made aware of changes in your building, they can't apply changes to the way the system operates or extensions to the system and then reduce your level of false alarms. So it's very important to have a transparent arrangement with your provider that basically they're aware of what's going on site. So that's it, guys. I'm not going to bore you, it's late in the afternoon. But if you do have any queries or any questions, please feel free, or if you want to give me your details, I can make contact with you, okay? Thanks.